the daily edition of Market Wrap with Mo Ansari.
Brought to you by Compact Asset Management,
Providing proactive portfolio management and world-class wealth management solutions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Market Wrap. I'm Mo Ansari, president of Compact Asset Management, and you're tuned in as you've been doing so for 2 decades now. And as always, you can call in, and I will be more than happy to share with you my 33 years of trading experience. So now let's go to our guest line and talk to someone who knows a lot more about the unemployment numbers and what is going on with the economy. That is former U.S. Secretary of Commerce under George W. Bush, and that is Mr. Carlos Gutierrez. In that role between 2005 and 2009, he oversaw a diverse cabinet agency with 38,000 employees and $6.5 billion budget focused on promoting American business domestically and overseas. Mr. Gutierrez is currently a scholar at the University of Miami's Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies and currently serves on the board of directors for United Technology Corporation, Occidental Petroleum, and GLW Corning. Mr. Gutierrez, welcome to Market Wrap.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Employers added 162,000 jobs in March, the biggest monthly gain in 3 years. The job rate held steady at 9.7. First of all, do you think we have turned the corner as far as creating jobs?
Well, I think it's better than anything we've seen in a while. I think we have to raise our expectations. 48,000 of those jobs were temporary census jobs. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of new temporary jobs. The number of people who are working part-time, who would like to work full-time, increased quite a bit during the month. The number of discouraged workers, people who have just given up looking for work, also increased. So, yes, it's a better number, and there's no question that we are on a much better trend than we were at, but there's so much more to do. If you look at the total underemployment, if you take into account discouraged workers and part-time workers who'd rather be working full-time, people who have left the labor force, we're talking well over 17%.
The U6 number, as it's called, that
Correct.
number is really quite a bit high. Mr. Gutierrez, a lot of what we hear is, look, this is what was handed to us from the previous administration. We are trying to clean up this mess. This was something that was handed to us. That's what we continually hear. Is this something that is correct that they're saying, the administration right now, or was this something that they inherited and they're trying to turn it around?
The average deficit, federal budget deficit, going back to World War II is about 2.3%.
Right.
During President Bush's administration, the average was about 2.3. Started out with 4%. We all recall the stock market, the dot-com bubble crash. Mm-hmm. But he had that down to about 1% of GDP in 2007. No question, that's when the bailout started. And because of the bailouts, because of the $350 billion stimulus, that number went up to about 5.5%.
Right. What
we have to recognize today is that number today is about 11%. The estimates are that in 2010 it will be 11%. That's 11% of our economy, 11% of our GDP is made up by a deficit.
Right.
Or our deficit is the size of 11% of our economy.
Right.
The only two countries, if you take the top 30 countries in the world, the only two countries with a higher deficit are Great Britain and Spain.
Let's talk about the deficit, 11% of GDP. It's one of the highest numbers we've seen, as you just mentioned, since the Second World War. How do we get rid of it? How do we bring that down? That's really the question. We have this deficit now. We're spending more than what we have. Where do we cut, and what would you cut if you were in that position?
This is one of the toughest problems, I think. If I had to name the president's number one challenge, it's that, because it's not easy. You have three options and combination and permutations of the three.
Right.
One is we grow ourselves out of it, which is going to be very tough because we know that tax increases are coming. Mm-hmm. So tax increases, in a way, put us into a vicious circle where we grow taxes, the economy slows down, We don't get the revenues we expected, so we have to raise taxes even more, and that just puts us into the vicious cycle. A lot of people talk about efficient government and lowering expenses,
Right.
and that we're going to get tough on government expenses. If you go back to World War II, you won't find 1 year where the expenses are below the previous year. So not even President Reagan, who was known to be a cost cutter and cutting programs, not even during his time were we actually able to cut our budget. So it's going to be very, very difficult, and we're going to have to deal with tough issues like entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And that, I think, is going to be President Obama's biggest challenge.
Is to cut spending. Also, you said taxes, I believe, obviously are going up. That's really the question. How much, especially on the higher income brackets and on unearned income and so on, that is going to go higher. That is going to retard growth, as you said, rather than increase growth. But isn't that going to also bring the deficit down like we saw in the Clinton administration, the raised taxes? And we had a budget surplus.
One thing that I do believe that President Clinton had that President Obama doesn't have is we had this tremendous, Silicon Valley technology surge that just kept going. I mean, eventually the stock market crashed, and as you know, the NASDAQ still isn't back to the levels it was then.
Right.
We had companies spending on Y2K, so I think that was wind at their backs during that time.
Mr. Gutierrez, let's talk a little bit more about, you mentioned that we need to, what would you do at this point in time? Let's say you're Secretary of Treasury. Let's just take that as an example. What would you do to turn things around?
What I would recommend is that we stop all spending increases. Just stop them. Because every new budget, every new program, every new plan has an increase in spending. I would recommend that we start a very serious analysis as to what we're going to do about entitlements, because if, as you know, Social Security is in the red. The net present value of Medicare and Medicaid is about a negative $43 trillion. So, we have to deal with that, and we're going to have to make decisions that not everyone likes. So I would recommend that we make that a top priority. I would also recommend that the President approve pending free trade agreements. We have free trade agreements that haven't even been submitted to Congress because certain interest groups don't like them, even though these are free trade agreements that would help our exporters. The Chinese continue to open up new markets. They continue to have their free trade agreements. Right now, as we speak, there is a plan to get the 10 ASEAN countries together with China, Korea, and Japan.
Secretary Gutierrez, let's talk a little bit about China. We've got this where they're artificially depressing their currency or keeping it low, so they have an export advantage. They're not letting our companies go in there and do the same kind of business that their companies are allowed to do here. How can we get an even playing field with them? Say, look, if you're going to have tremendous access to our markets, we should have access to their markets. Wouldn't that be fair? That's
absolutely fair, and China gets a bum rap because they're so big. There are so many other countries in the world where we have those similar problems where we have been trying to convince them little by little to open up their markets, and they've been doing that. China had a period of time where they revalued their currency. They stopped doing that. The question now is, how can we be effective? There are things that China wants from us. For example, they want desperately to buy higher technology goods from us, which we took out as a result of the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident.
Right.
Well, those goods can be bought from, and they're buying them from France. They're buying them from other countries. We're not keeping them from buying the technology. What we're doing is we're keeping American exporters from selling them the technology. They're going to retaliate, and what we'll end up in is a trade war with both sides losing jobs.
Secretary Gutierrez, I want to thank you for taking the time out today and giving us an idea about commerce and how this is working, especially with what's going on with China, and also talking about what happened with the U.S. numbers and where we're headed as an economy. Thank you again for being with us
today.
Thank
you. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. That's Secretary Carlos Gutierrez, who's the former U.S. Secretary of Commerce under George W. Bush.